Hello and welcome to Original Soundchat, where video game music is a work of art. On each episode, it's our goal to help you learn about 2 soundtracks from the world of games, as well as the people, stories, and critical tracks behind them. My name is DeVader.
And I'm Peter Spezia. We're brought to you by Anonymous Dinosaur and Rhymes with Asia. It's time to appreciate great OSTs and the games that they come from, without getting too bogged down in music theory. Joe, what are this week's games?
Up first is 2021's Sumire, a narrative journey following a young girl trying to show her magic flower friend the perfect day, accompanied by a gorgeous acoustic soundtrack.
Following that is the journey of a time-traveling boy and his fairy companion to not only save the world, but also set the foundation for every 3D open-world action-adventure video game to come. 1998's The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. It took more than 3 years, but we're finally talking about an all-time classic.
Yeah, and also, Ocarina of Time. I can't steal that joke. You already did that on Twitter. I can't.
It's a good one, though. I'm proud of it. But yeah, wow, we're finally talking about Ocarina of Time. We'll get to why we're talking about that and how we've worked our way around that in the back half of the show. But yeah, the theme this week for these 2 games, I think you can kind of tell based on the descriptions, but they are children going on an adventure with their floating ball-like companion. And yeah, I wouldn't have expected that tie between these 2 games. Honestly, I didn't even know what Sumire was when you brought it to the show, but you did mention it last year. I think it was an early consideration for like your top 10 favorite games or best of 2021 or something like that, but I'm interested to learn more.
I think it might have been one of my picks for honorable mention, but I'm not 100% sure. It was definitely an honorable mention, if like at the very least. I don't blame you. Nobody but me knows what this game is, and I only know what this game is because I reviewed it. So I'm excited to introduce it to people, and I hope this brings more people to play it.
Absolutely. But it's been a few weeks since we've talked. We've done our respective moves. We see this reflected in the video backgrounds here. Congratulations on your move. I know I'm here, and right now it's mid-April and it's snowing outside. Oh. I think we're going to experience all 4 seasons in Michigan this week, because at the end of the week it's going to be mid to high 70s. That's about 25 degrees Celsius. So we're getting the whole range in there. Hope everything went well for you, though. How are you doing? What are you playing, Joe?
Surprisingly, even with the move, I got a lot of smaller stuff done. I finished Final Fantasy VIII. Hey, Final Fantasy VIII has one of the worst final dungeons I've ever played in a JRPG in my entire life. The gimmick of it is that it takes away all of your abilities, and you have to go beat mini bosses to get those abilities back. And when I say abilities, I mean the ability to use magic, the ability to use healing items, the ability to do anything except for attack. And it's terrible. It's really, really bad. Final Fantasy VIII is not a great game, but I pushed through it with spite, and that's how I do it. There was a small mini sequel to Demon Turf released just out of the blue a couple days ago at time of recording, and I just finished it yesterday. It was really short, like maybe 2 hours, if that. Had a good time. More Demon Turf is always fun. So, during my solo episode, the NVIDIA leak came up. I mentioned that Kingdom Hearts 4 is among the games on that leak, and was like, haha, but I'll believe that when I see it.
And then that happened.
And then 1 week later, I sure saw it. And it became super clear that even more so than I humanly thought, which I already was in denial about, the mobile games are going to be super important to the plot of that game. And so I went and I watched all of the cutscenes in the cutscene viewer that the game now is of Kingdom Hearts Union Cross. What a game that was. The last 4 hours are really, really good. There are like 10 hours before that, but the last 4 hours of story were really good, and the ending has some challenging stuff. And other than that, I've been playing Kirby, finally. Kirby in the Forgotten Land.
Nice.
By the time we talk again, I will have finished Kirby, but when exactly that will be, I cannot say.
Okay. And also, tell me about Chinatown Detective Agency.
Oh my god, how did I almost forget to talk about Chinatown Detective Agency? So, it is an adventure game that came out last week. Supposedly, according to the developers, it's heavily inspired by Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego and those games.
Yes.
Which I didn't play those as a kid, so I don't have a lot of nostalgia for those, but it is a noir, almost cyberpunk future mystery game where one of the main mechanics is, here's a hint to solve this puzzle, Google it and figure it out. At one point, I had to pull up an emulator for an Enigma machine, which was a code ciphering machine that the Germans used in World War II.
Oh, yeah. Classic history.
Yeah, I had to pull one of those up to solve one of the puzzles. It's really, really cool. It is, I think, right now, my game of the year. It's only April, so that could change. But yeah, if you like adventure games, it's well worth your time. And also, in case people are worried that maybe I'm too stupid to play a game like that, there is a character who you can call and she will just tell you the answer. She'll give you a hint, or you could just say, hey, just tell me the answer. Just tell me what it is.
That's smart for accessibility. It's on Xbox Game Pass. I think it's one I want to queue up there. Also, Life is Strange 2 Colors came out on Game Pass.
Yeah.
Amazing that they're bringing those out. I have so many games to catch up on. I still haven't gotten to Elden Ring. I still haven't gotten to Horizon Forbidden West. The move is taking over everything, and I just got to find out what order I want to play everything in. Probably Elden Ring, though, because that's still a rental copy, and that's tick, 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 ticking time. So...
I also got to get back to Elden Ring from my 1 hour I played before we moved.
All right, let's talk about some composer follow-up news quickly. Not a lot here. It's been some time since we've talked, but, the game industry kind of feels like at a lull. News-wise, there's some rumors ramping up, though. Talks of maybe Sony's in discussions to buy From Software, and things like Sonic Origins, just got rated for the South Korea ratings board, and there's a key art that popped on the PlayStation Store. Could we see something soon with Sonic Origins? Things like that floating around, nothing too confirmed, but let's talk about Utada Hikaru. We talked about Kingdom Hearts. She's the singer for the main themes for those games. And Coachella's going on right now as we record, or at least it was this weekend. It seems to just be, a long music festival. And she was there performing. So she opened up her set with Simple and Clean from Kingdom Hearts, which we brought up when we talked about that game.
Knew the audience. Knew exactly what that audience was waiting for sure.
For sure. And, of course, her other songs, including Face My Fears from Kingdom Hearts 3. So, that's something. That's a way to... I guess there's been so many different, artists now that the music scene seems to be opening back up. Whether or not that's a good thing is a whole other point, but good for Utada Hikaru to come stateside.
Yeah. All I can think of when I see the name now is that people pointing out, like, hey, Kairi's hairstyle in every single game has reflected Utada's hairstyle.
Isn't that crazy? I saw that too. Wow.
Yeah, that, like, at first I was like, that has to be a coincidence, but 3 times? 3 times? No, that ain't a coincidence at that point. So I wonder what Kairi's gonna look like this time. If she's even in the game. Following that, though, we have a re-release. Well, sort of a re-release. It's coming out on other platforms, that being No More Heroes 3, of course, with the soundtrack by Jun Fukuda. Talked about him back in episode 109 for his work on the original No More Heroes. I believe that was when No More Heroes 3 came out.
That sounds about right. No More Heroes 3, originally a Switch exclusive, but yeah, coming to these other platforms fall 2022. He didn't do a lot of the music for this one. Again, he was like the guitarist on No More Heroes. And I think he probably reprises his performances. He's at least listed in the Wikipedia page for No More Heroes 3. But I feel like that was like the biggest game announcement in the last week or so. So I think it's worth a mention. It's tied to what we've talked about before.
Yeah, it's been a bit of a slow week. I think like Inkle announced a game with like a single screenshot, and that's the only other news I can think of. Anyways, alright, let's talk about Sumire. Now I know I shouldn't have to describe Sumire, we all know what it is. Just kidding, nobody listening to this, nobody in this call except for me knows what this game is, so I am pleased to be able to introduce you to it. It was released on May 26th, 2021 for PC, Switch, and iOS. It was developed and published by Game Tomo. So what is Sumire? It is a narrative adventure game that is pretty much as basic as it gets. Sumire can run around on a sort of 2.5D-ish plane. Like, she's got movement along the X and Y axis, but it's a side scroller for the most part. And she can find items, use those items to solve puzzles and move the plot forward. There are some mini games you can play, like there's a card game that you can play with one of the other kids in the neighborhood. There's a game about telling a scarecrow nice things about itself to try and counteract all the crows telling the scarecrow it sucks. That was a weird one to remind myself about. Other than that, it's mainly built around, there's some dialogue options that I don't think actually affect all that much, though they do affect how Sumire acts towards certain people in town. So, like, it basically always boils down to, are you going to be mean to this person, or are you going to be nice to this person? A real Mass Effect Paragon Renegade binary there. So, the story of Sumire is rather simple, but also has a lot of moving parts to it, I guess. Young Sumire is an elementary schooler who has had a hard time of it pretty recently. Her grandmother, whom she was very close to, has recently passed away. Her parents have also recently separated, with her father moving into the city and her mother becoming quite depressed as a result. And, like, that's already a hell of a situation to be in for a young kid. It's my guess, by the way, that Sumire is an elementary schooler. She might be a young middle schooler, but she's very young. One night, Sumire wakes up with a start and finds herself walking over to her grandmother's memorial. And at that moment, a cluster of glowing seeds flies through her window, and out of curiosity, she does what any of us would do with glowing seeds that flew in through the window. She plants them.
Oh, I'd eat them.
And then she goes back to sleep. And when she wakes up, the seeds have grown into a flower, and that flower can talk. Sumire creatively names this flower Flower, and Flower reveals that he only has one day to live in the human world and asks Sumire to show him the perfect day. He has her make a list of things she could do that could potentially change her life. And from there, she and Flower begin their adventure around the rural Japanese town in which she lives, crossing items off her list, such as making up with her former best friend Chie, and possibly getting her first kiss, with the end of that checklist ending in a simple promise. If Sumire can show Flower the perfect day, she might be able to see her grandmother one last time. So here's where I will ask the question I already know the answer to. What is your experience with Sumire, Peter?
Well, you mentioning it for Best of 2021, that's a start. I feel like you're the only person I've heard talk about this game, but it sounds like a cute premise. Granted, it kind of brings up some Undertale vibes when we're talking about a young protagonist and a flower character, at least on the early onset there. But no, it sounds cute. And the soundtrack, I mean, my goodness, from what we've previewed here before we show to you all, it's It's really good, and I'm impressed.
Yeah, it's very pretty. It was a game that kind of surprised me. I think that the way I ended up on the review is we got a PR email, and I don't usually look at those because we get a lot of them over at NWR, Nintendo World Report. But for some reason I think I accidentally clicked on the Sumire one and just took a minute to skim over the premise and look at some of the art and was like, all right, this sounds kind of up my alley. And I was right. It was quite up my alley. Is it a game that I think would blow a lot of people away? No, I don't think it would. But it's not long. It's like 3 hours, maybe.
You know, it's a similar game that gives me the kind of vibe, in case like anyone else has played this game. It sounds a lot, and correct me if I'm wrong, but Rakuen.
Yeah. It's actually, I could see that in tone being very close to each other.
Okay. So, I mean, yeah, if you've played that game from Laura Shigihara, it sounds like this same kind of vibe.
It's less sad at the very least, which I know is weird to say about a game where one of the first sentences I said was, her grandma is dead. But I feel like we don't see a lot of games about kids in that age range. They're always teenagers or up.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So in that regard alone, like it's already kind of novel there. But like you said, the soundtrack is, oh my God, it's so good. For a game that no one else has heard of, I'd say the soundtrack is kind of worth playing the whole game on its own. And of course, since I am the only human being on this planet that has played Sumire, I couldn't find anything. This game doesn't even have a Wikipedia article. There's nothing. I am shocked I found as much as I did about the artists behind the soundtrack, but it does have an 86 on Metacritic. That sounds about right to me, even though I gave it a 9.5, making it one of the highest rated games we had in 2021 over at Nintendo World Report, which is how I remembered that I gave it a 9.5. And I think I stand behind that. It has a 78 on PC. That's not super surprising, I suppose. I feel like there are a lot more people whom that's not going to be their bag on PC, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Reviews overall heaped a lot of praise on the art and story, which the art is fantastic. This game is really, really pretty. And the story is, pretty good. I have fond memories of it. Some of them mentioned the soundtrack. Not enough of them mentioned the soundtrack, but some of them did. Some people did take some points off, though, because it is very simple gameplay. I would not call it complex gameplay in any way, shape, or form. More people should play Sumire. If you listen to this episode and you hear the soundtrack and you're like, okay, I want to try that game. Like I said, it's 3 hours long. You should give it a shot. It's neat, I think, and it's worth taking a look at. For our composer that we are going to focus on for Sumire, the composer of the game is actually a duo called TOW. Tao. I don't actually know how it's supposed to be pronounced, but it's all capitals, so I'm going to assume it's TOW, but who knows? They are a Japanese acoustic duo consisting of Nue, who performs vocals and electric accordion, and Kai, who performs the acoustic guitar. And you can actually follow the band on Twitter at TOW_news. You can follow Nue at NUE_TOW. You can follow Kai at K2Geist. They have a website called TOW-music.com, and they also have a YouTube channel, which is TOW Music, but that YouTube channel only gets uploaded every 2 years or so. For instance, the last video they put up on that channel was a promo video for Sumire that was uploaded 10 months ago. But other than that, like, their website basically lists Sumire, and that's it. But apparently they according to their site, quote, do live performances mainly in Tokyo and sometimes collaborate with live calligrapher, play, other arts. That is a direct quote, by the way. Basically, they seem to be a group that doesn't really do their own thing a lot. They more collaborate with other artists to do experimental stuff. And hey, I can respect that, honestly. And in terms of discography, like, Sumire appears to be the only game they have worked on outside of their game work on Sumire. The only other bit of discography I could find was an EP listed on their site titled Sato no Tsuki. But otherwise, it doesn't seem like they have released all that much over the years. In terms of historical development research for Sumire, there's nothing. Did you really think I was going to find something? Come on. So let's jump into the Critical 5. This soundtrack is the entire reason I'm bringing this game to the show because I absolutely adore it. It was almost in my top 10 last year, just barely didn't make it. Let's talk about critical track number 1, Night Among the Stars. This is the main menu theme, and it's pretty indicative of what a lot of the soundtrack is going to sound like. And, this track is gorgeous! It's the first thing that hit me when I started playing, and it's this very simple sort of melody that you will hear again in this Critical 5, but it's got that simplicity makes it very memorable, and the little bits of vocals in there are also just, they really strengthen the whole thing, I feel like. It's this very soothing, it has a warmth to it, and it does fit the title really well, I think, of Night Among the Stars, looking at the beautiful night sky and the rural countryside and all that. It's a really good song.
Yeah, I think it's a nice introduction to what we're about to hear with this. It's also nice that you kind of break out what the two performers in the duo, what they contribute, because, acoustic guitar is going to drive the whole experience in pretty much every single piece. Like, that's the main crux of it. But whether it's vocals or it's accordion, like, they're nice additions to kind of round out the sound. And you're right, the little vocal affectations here, so to speak, just really give it that nice texture. Really nice opening piece.
Yeah, Kai is a hell of a acoustic guitar composer at the very least.
Yep.
And we're going to hear a bit more of that in critical track number 2. This is A Dazzling Morning. This is basically one of the first songs you're going to hear when you walk out of Sumire's house for the first time. It just has this energy of you're walking out onto this farmland, because they live outside of town, in this already kind of small town. And so she's got to like cross farmland and a river to get into town. And this song's energy is just really, really nice and does feel like, all right, it's the start of the day. The possibilities are endless. And this was another one of those where, as I was playing, I was like, oh man, this soundtrack's really good, huh? Well, I guess I'll be the only one that talks about it forever. But I dig this song a lot.
For the acoustic guitar to be the only instrument here is wild. And I think the fact that for an indie game, you could have easily gone with like, oh, you know, MIDIs are pretty good. You can just get like a MIDI performance. No, hearing the live artistry here is fantastic. Granted, it is certainly, I would imagine, a layered piece. It's not all done on one guitar all the time, but the performance here is incredible, and I'm super impressed. But also more just stands out that it's like, no other instruments. Like, acoustic guitar, shine, go.
Yeah, it's really, really, really cool. And yeah, that's a good point of like, you don't expect this kind of live performance sort of sound to be in a game like this. Especially when it's a game that, like, nobody played. I'm the only one that played this damn game. And they could have gone with MIDIs, but no, I really am glad that they went with just a live acoustic guitar and all that, because they pulled it off extremely well. And we're going to hear a little bit more of that in critical track number 3. This is Gentle Rain. Now, there's a little bit more added to the acoustic guitar. Obviously, it's like, that's a MIDI of something, but what it is, I don't know. I think it's supposed to be a flute.
Some synth, yeah. I could see it trying to channel a flute, yeah.
This song plays later in the day. Obviously, as you might guess, it starts to rain, like, way later in the day. This song has this really good sort of... It really channels the idea of, like, the rainy season sort of feeling. Like, we talked about that game a while ago. Feels like 7,000 years ago, but it was probably, like, for all I know, like a month ago.
Rainy season, yeah.
It sort of has the same feel there of where it's trying to channel the idea of, like, when you're a kid, a rainy day is a lot more mystical than it is when you're, like, an adult. I hate rainy days now. Rainy days suck.
Yep.
And I want rain to die. But when you're a kid, like, I don't know, there's water falling from the sky, man. That's cool. And it's just, there's a lot of fun stuff you can do in the rain. And I think this song really kind of catches that childlike wonder of, you know, just being in the rain in the middle of the day. I don't know.
I think mystical's a perfect word for it, because I think that really captures that flute synth sound just perfectly. You're totally right about rainy days. But yeah, no, this one's really nice. And again, like, kudos to Kai on acoustic guitar, because it really gives it that texture, that pace. It's not like we're getting like a percussion behind it or anything like that. But yeah, for the synth being added to it, just really adds that extra nice layer.
In fact, has there been any percussion in any of the songs so far? I don't think there has. Not in the ones we talked about.
Not any drums, but you know, I feel like there's something to like the plucking of the string, or like any, you know, fingers hitting strings there. They're not doing any knocks against the body of the acoustic guitar, but I feel like that's giving it like enough substitution of a sound.
Now let's get a little bit more of Nue in here, though. In the song that plays during, weirdly enough, one of my favorite moments in the entire game, despite the fact that there's no real reason for it to be. This is critical track number 4, Reflections on a Bus. So I don't remember why this part really, really stuck with me. But it's near the end of the game, and Sumire gets on a bus to go out to an area that she used to go to with her grandma a lot. And there's just this single animation of her looking out the window of this bus with sort of this melancholy sort of tone to it. And you can see her reflection in the window, and you can see things going by, and you could just sit on that screen for as long as you want. And this is the song that plays. I don't think it's one of my favorite songs in the game, but that moment, for some reason, I'm pretty sure I let that moment sit for at least a good 5 minutes. Because something about it was just like, yeah, no, I need this right now. I need this, like, almost meditative moment in my life at this exact moment. Even to the point where it became the thumbnail of the review as well, like that screenshot. And it's just, I don't know, something about that moment really grabbed me, despite the fact that it is literally a moment where nothing happens.
But sometimes those moments are important, right? It's like the giraffe moment in The Last of Us. You kind of need those moments to sit and linger and ponder. And I feel like this song gives it a good melancholy and weight to it. Nue's great performance just kind of gives it, it's almost not really like a haunting, chilling vibe, but, reflective is probably the best word to describe it. And it's almost to a point where I know they're Japanese performers and it's set in a small Japanese town, but the performance almost doesn't sound Japanese to me. And it makes me think of like performances with Amy Evans where she's like performing a language that is, made up for the story, but obviously that wouldn't make sense here. It just sounds so ethereal, mystical that I don't get the Japanese feeling from it, if that makes sense.
Sort of. I don't know if she's singing words in this song. It's hard to tell.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, if she is, then I agree. I don't think she's singing Japanese in this song. But it might just be that she's singing very long and drawn out, and that's why we can't recognize it.
Sure, yep.
But yeah, reflective is a good way to describe this song called Reflections on a Bus that I didn't think of somehow. But yeah, I agree. But where I think Nue really shines more than this song just in general, critical track number 5 is Sumire. Oh, I adore this song. It's so good. This is the credits song, obviously, and also the main theme of the game. It's, once again, that melody I said we were going to hear again from Night Among the Stars. And, I don't know, it's a very emotional tune that I think does a really, really, really good job of sort of driving home the ending of Sumire. It doesn't have a sad ending. At least, it might have multiple endings, I don't know. But the one I got was not sad. It's kind of melancholy, but, it has this sort of hopeful feeling to it, especially because it's supposed to, like, bring across that, Sumire is still a kid. She's got her whole life ahead of her, and sometimes things are going to happen and they're going to be kind of sad, but, like, it's what you do after the sad stuff that really defines how it's going to affect you. And this song, I think, has this... We've mentioned the word haunting a couple of times when talking about the music in this game, but I think this one is really one of those songs that I would 100% describe the vocals from Nue in this song as haunting. They're gorgeous. This song is great.
And I think that's mostly because of her vocal quality. There's like an airiness and a breathiness to it as opposed to like a crisp pop star kind of timbre there. But I think this works perfectly as an ending theme. I mean, not knowing the context of the game, but a credits theme is a perfect time to bring out a vocal performance in a song like that. And hey, we get bongos. So hey, we get a little bit of percussion in there, and that's a nice kind of full circle, from Journey beginning to Journey's end and coming full circle and having some character growth in there.
Yeah. Honestly, this is the song where I was like, I am going to have to bring this to the show at some point. Pretty much just this song. I went and bought this soundtrack on Steam because I liked it so much.
Well, there you go.
All right, let's get into the cutting room floor. I got 2 songs. The first one is Dancing Through Town. This is some JRPG ass town music.
Oh, yeah.
Like, this feels like something I would hear when I walked into a town in Final Fantasy VIII, maybe 9. It's a lot of fun, but it's also one of those songs where you first hear it in game and you're like, that's a change in everything. But I dig it a lot. It's memorable at the very least. I will give it that.
Yeah, it's kind of a goofy retro little vibe. I think I would imagine, playing off of kind of retro game music in a way. And again, simple layering with 2 acoustic guitar layers that Kai's playing here. In a little bit of panning work too, where you have those guitars kind of offset differently in your ears. One's kind of like the doon 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 doon, and kind of the bass there, and then you get the melody going in the other one. So that's really neat.
And the second track on the cutting room floor, we talked a lot about Kai's acoustic guitar and Nue's vocals, but remember, she also had a second thing listed on there, which was the electric accordion. You're going to hear some of that in the second track on the cutting room floor, Afternoon Song. This is the music that plays in that buffer area between Sumire's house and town after lunch, because you do have to go home and get lunch. You're a growing child. And yeah, there's some electric accordion in there. It's nice. I wanted to at least feature some of Nue's other thing, so I'm glad that I was able to grab a track that did that. And I think it's a fun song.
Absolutely. Good to get that instrument sound in here, and it's definitely an electric accordion. If I had heard it and you had not mentioned it's an accordion, but there's something not usual about it, but the electric part makes sense completely. Mm-hmm. Also, what is it about accordions that just always brings you back to Professor Layton?
Yeah.
This could entirely play in a Layton game, and it'd be totally fine.
I had thought the exact same thing when I went and listened back over this soundtrack. Layton owns accordions now. I don't make the rules, but that's just how it is now.
Straight facts.
So what will I never forget about Sumire? I wish more people would play it, and that's one of my goals for this episode, is to say, hey, you there, listening, everybody, if you think this soundtrack was really good, or you think this game concept sounds interesting, go play Sumire. It is. I'm going to go look it up on the eShop right now. It is $10 on the Nintendo Switch. I haven't been keeping track of how much it goes on sale for, if it ever does, because Nintendo's store literally won't let me do that. But yeah, if you if this sounds like it's worth a shot, I mean, $10, I mean, it's not $5, but it's not a lot to ask. And you should give it a shot. I don't think you would regret it. Do I think it's a game you will remember until the day you die? No, probably not. But I don't think you'd regret giving it a shot.
It sounds like a cute adventure, and yeah, wow, the soundtrack has won me over.
So, for the transition, usually we would cover a fan remix, fan cover, fan whatever, but those don't exist for Sumire because, again, I'm the only human being that's heard this soundtrack, apparently. So I went and picked another song from the soundtrack, and this song is called T-Man's Theme, and the reason I picked it is because this is the third game in 2021 where I went to talk to an NPC, and it was just straight up unapologetically Hayao Miyazaki. Like, Eastward also just had a Hayao Miyazaki NPC that was just there. So, it makes sense for Sumire a lot because it is very, very heavily inspired by a lot of Ghibli stuff as well. I probably should mention that. But yeah, I wanted to make that the transition because I wanted to be able to mention that Miyazaki's in this game. Please enjoy, and we will be right back to talk about a game you have heard of.
On a version of the Sumire soundtrack that I have, this T-Man's theme is also titled Moon Whooping. I don't know if that's relevant or ties into the game in any way, but I thought that was interesting.
If I remember correctly, you talked to the dude and he talks about how, like, kids don't know how good they have it, and this gives a lot of, like, old man yells at cloud rants, which sounds very Miyazaki. So maybe that's what it's supposed to... I don't know.
That kind of checks out. Let's talk about a game that I think a lot of people would be surprised that it took us so long to discuss. How has it been so long and we have not discussed The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time? We're on episode 169. Nice. But Ocarina of Time, finally. And why is that? So the main composer for this game, who's the main composer for this game?
Koji Kondo.
That's right. It is Koji Kondo. And so we got Koji Kondo out of the way pretty early on. I think it was episode 17, I think. It was, Koji Kondo for Super Mario 64, and then we paired it with Sonic Adventure 2 and Jun Sonoe. All right, and so we're done talking about Koji Kondo, and for a while, like a couple years, we were like, how can we cover other composers if, like, that's the one guy? It's the guy for the game, and so that's honestly why we pushed off Ocarina of Time for so long, because finally, after a certain point, we're like, all right, maybe we just talk about like an engineer, a musician, or in this case, for The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, a conductor. It'll be interesting to talk about who that is, but we'll get to that shortly. It has also been, over the last 3+ years, not the first time we've talked about a Legend of Zelda game. We started with The Wind Waker in episode 2, then Link's Awakening in episode 34. We covered both Majora's Mask and Skyward Sword in episode 66, Breath of the Wild in episode 95, and The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess in episode 132. But now we get to Zelda no Densetsu Toki no Ocarina, and that released November 21st, 1998, for Nintendo 64 in Japan. Then, The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time would release 2 days later in North America on November 23rd. It would arrive in Europe on December 11th, and then a week later on December 18th in Australia. The original game has been released on every Nintendo home console since then. You can actually play the game on Nintendo Switch through the Nintendo Switch Online Expansion Pass. There was also an enhanced remake of The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time 3D, which released on Nintendo 3DS in June 2011. The game is published by Nintendo EAD and published by Nintendo. What is Ocarina of Time? It is a third-person 3D action-adventure game that inspired open-world games like it to come. From 1998, showing people how you can step out on an open world and there it is in front of you. It certainly inspired plenty of games to come since then. And so when you play Ocarina of Time, there's a blend of combat, exploration, and puzzles involving the use of different items. You get to travel across Hyrule Field into different towns and then gain access to treasures that reside in dungeons. You primarily fight with a sword and shield, but you can also use other weapons such as projectiles, bombs, and magic spells. The control scheme that was in the game for Nintendo 64 also introduced influential techniques such as context-sensitive actions and a targeting system. See, the Z targeting system locked on to enemies to manage combat in 3D space better. Granted, is there a lot of waiting around? Sure, but it was a new system at the time. While the context-sensitive actions lets you either, say, climb or push a box with the same face button press, but it depends on if you're moving against the box or not with the left analog stick. If you're next to the box and you're not moving, but you press A, well, you can climb on the box. But if you're leaning that analog stick against the box and then you press A, that's a grab and push. So, the story of The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. In the land of Hyrule, the fairy Navi brings Link to the great Deku Tree, who is cursed and near death. The Deku Tree tells Link that a wicked man of the desert cursed him, and he seeks to conquer the world, and that Link must stop him. Before dying, the great Deku Tree gives Link the spiritual stone of the forest, and sends him to Hyrule Castle to speak with Hyrule's princess. That would be the young Zelda, who believes that Ganondorf, the evil sorcerer and Gerudo king, is seeking the Triforce, a holy relic that gives its holder godlike power. Zelda asks Link to obtain the other two spiritual stones along with his Stone of the Forest so he can enter the Sacred Realm and claim the Triforce before Ganondorf reaches it. Can Link obtain the other spiritual stones? What actually happens when someone enters the Sacred Realm? And can Link stop Ganondorf's evil plans? So, Joe, here's what I'll ask you. What are our experiences with The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time?
I mean, it is, of course, one of the most influential video games ever made. Ever. You talked about Z targeting. Pretty much every game with a lock-on function is an evolved form of Z targeting. Like, they invented lock-on for third-person games just straight up wholesale. For me, it's not one of my favorite Zelda games, mostly because I just like Majora's Mask a lot more in terms of the 64 ones. But I've played it twice. I played the N64 version the first time. It took me a very long time to get to it. I was like 21 when I beat it for the first time, maybe 20. And I also, for Smasher Pieces, played the 3DS version for the first time. And they're both pretty good games. I think they've got some flaws, obviously, that didn't age great, but like, you know, it comes with the territory of, much like Mario 64, when you are the first, you're not going to get everything right. And that's fine. But for the most part, it's mostly just acknowledging how important this game is to video games in general. And I have a lot of respect for Ocarina of Time, I guess you would say.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the comparison to Super Mario 64 is a fair one, where it is a foundational game for representing this kind of game in a 3D space. And have other games iterated on what it's trying to do better? Sure. But it's so important for the time, especially so when I was trying to show my fiance, like introduce her to console video games in general. You know, how do you represent the Legend of Zelda franchise? What's the first one you go to? Ocarina of Time is not the prettiest game to look at. You know, it shows its age with the late 90s Nintendo 64 graphics, but it's such an important one that's, you know, I showed her as far as like me playing and her watching. And then we also have like a weird memory with it where it was February of 2020 and it was, you know, just before the pandemic and all that. But I was playing through the Fire Temple and she took a nap and I stopped at one point to check the phone because, you know, it was blown up with notifications. And that was when Kobe Bryant died.
No. That is not where I thought that would go.
I know. It's just a weird mental association where it's like when I learned, you know, that he died, you know, Michael Jackson, it was, you know, sitting in my apartment room at college, my junior year. For Kobe Bryant, it was like I'm in the middle of playing Ocarina of Time. And for me, I've played that game so many times. I think between like 7 to 10 times. I don't know what the actual number is, but yeah, it's an important game for sure. It's one I am fond of. It's not my favorite Zelda game. I agree with you there, but it's a really important one. I think I first played it, probably when I was in like high school and I was trying out like Nintendo 64 emulation on my computer. Now, granted, I like grew up with Zelda to the point where like my first Zelda game that I played was Oracle of Ages. A weird first one. But then as a result, I think Ocarina of Time was the first 3D Zelda game I played. And of course, a good first 3D Zelda game to play for all the ones that would follow. But it was definitely through different means than playing it on Nintendo 64. But yeah, a lot of memories associated with this game. And just a lot of playthroughs and different references that other games have taken from it going forward. And it was interesting to learn about this game, certainly. Also your Smasher Pieces episode does come to mind of, you know, certain things that were brought up in research and hearing your impressions there. But then when we get to talking about the music, it's one where, you know, certainly we both had our say on the cutting room floor, and it was so difficult to narrow it down. There were at least like 10 games that you could have put in these spots. There were two, you know, for sure, hard locks in the Critical 5, but we'll talk about that when we get there. As far as the development of Ocarina of Time, Nintendo EAD developed Ocarina of Time concurrently with Super Mario 64 and Mario Kart 64 for the Nintendo 64. The game apparently had a budget in excess of $12 million at the time, and more than 200 people worked on the game. Ocarina of Time was apparently initially planned as a game for the ill-fated N64DD peripheral, where it would be the add-on of the disk drive, trying to move to more of an optical disc, seeing what the PlayStation was doing and all that. But yeah, ill-fated because it never really came out. And as the developers realized as they were starting to build this game, they needed the instant read speed of a cartridge instead of the slower read speeds from a compact disc. And this was needed because they needed to call on around 500 motion captured character animations. And this doing so, reading from a disc, would be very taxing to the game's performance. So they're like, all right, it's not going to be on the DD. We're going to make it work for Nintendo 64 and its cartridge. So then when they do shift development to the Nintendo 64, like, it's all right, it's on a cartridge. Let's put it on a regular 16 megabyte cartridge like we would with Super Mario 64. How do we organize the game? Well, we can have Ganon's Tower be a Princess Peach's Castle like hub world, if you compare it to Super Mario 64, where the main character goes and walks through portals and have the levels load that way. Well, they didn't really want to do that, but that was the initial plan. And so eventually, when they have this idea of Hyrule Field being an open world and you have to travel across it and be on this grand adventure, they needed a 32 megabyte cartridge. And that would be the first time it would be used for Nintendo 64, and it made it the biggest game that Nintendo had made to date. Ocarina of Time had 5 game directors, with Zelda creator Shigeru Miyamoto supervising as a producer. This is because different parts of the game were handled by different directors. I think Yoshiaki Koizumi is one of those directors. Eiji Aonuma, I think, designed the dungeons. So just different people, a few names I don't think are still with Nintendo, but there are a couple names that are like, oh yeah, those are certainly Nintendo stalwarts today. And so the different teams worked on different basic experiments, and having this be a new strategy for Nintendo EAD to kind of have different directors split up the duties. So there were things like the scenario and planning, Link's actions, transforming classic 2D items into an improved 3D form, camera experiments, motion capture, sound, special effects, and the flow of time to make it look like, the sun's moving in the sky, do a day-night cycle out on the field. And then also, time travel is a whole thing with this game as well. So things like that. Because 3D games were new at the time and combat was important to get right, especially in a Zelda game, Shigeru Miyamoto recommended using the Chanbara, or the samurai genre of Japanese sword fighting, as a model for the game's combat. And then it makes sense why there's a lot of waiting for your opponent to strike, to then dodge and kind of wait for that opening. Because, it's if you're having a samurai fight, that makes sense.
Yeah, that checks out. That explains so much. Oh my God.
Yeah, I guess I hadn't really thought of it that way before, but okay. So the development of this involved more than 120 people, including stunt performers, used to capture the effects of sword fighting and Link's movement. Basic motion capture at the time, but you know what? It worked. Also, something I had never thought of with this game, the cutscenes in Ocarina of Time are completely generated with real-time computing on the Nintendo 64 and do not use pre-rendered full-motion video. They're all in-engine, and this represents Miyamoto's vision of having cinematic scenes that were still distinguishable from films. And this required the real-time architecture for a total of more than 90 minutes of cutscenes, which, if you think about it, when, the PlayStation is loading these kind of FMV files, these full-motion video files, if you had 90 minutes of cutscenes broken down in these video files, that would have been an immense amount of storage if it were pre-rendered video on a CD-ROM. But this also allowed the developers to make changes late into development. Because if you had to make a change to a cutscene and you were having an FMV on the disc, well, you have to now re-render this whole video file. And so fortunately, if it's just a change in engine, much easier to do later in the game. $10 million was apparently spent on marketing Ocarina of Time, which seems to be almost as much as the development budget. And this was because Nintendo was seen at the time as having not many first-party games in its third holiday season with Nintendo 64. So something was needed to make or break the platform, especially when Ocarina of Time had missed the 1997 holiday with getting delayed back. Fortunately, Nintendo saw Ocarina of Time as a reinvigorating blockbuster akin to a hit Hollywood movie. And that they did have on their hands. The game reviewed exceptionally well, with a game rankings aggregate of 98% and a Metacritic of 99.
It's still one of the highest rated games on Metacritic, isn't it?
It is the best reviewed game of all time on Metacritic. Yeah, why did it take us so long to talk about this game? My goodness. Nearly everything was praised in the game, including its visuals, sound, gameplay, soundtrack, and writing. It is also the first ever video game to receive a perfect score from the Japanese video game magazine Famitsu.
That I didn't know. I knew that perfect scores from Famitsu are relatively rare. I did not know that Ocarina was the first.
It sure was. I think Super Mario 64 was just like one shy. It was like a 39 out of 40. But perfect 40 out of 40. And there's only been like, I want to say it's like in the 23 range of like how many games have received perfect scores from Famitsu. I mean, some of those are weird ones for sure. And there aren't many Western games. It's like Grand Theft Auto 5, Skyrim, and there's like one other that really stand out. But yeah, Ocarina of Time is the first. It sold more than 7 million copies worldwide. In the United States, it received more than 3 times more pre-orders than any other video game at the time. And it was the best-selling game of 1998 in the country. Of course, it won Game of the Year from a variety of outlets, and this was in the incredible year of 1998. 98 often cited as one of the best video game years of all time. It was nominated for 7 awards at the Interactive Achievement Awards, which was an award show that was in its second year, and it would become the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences Awards, and what we now know as the DICE Awards today. It won 6 of those 7, including Game of the Year, Outstanding Achievement in Interactive Design, Outstanding Achievement in Software Engineering, Console Game of the Year, Console Adventure Game of the Year, and Console Role-Playing Game of the Year. Many outlets have also, at one point or another, named Ocarina of Time as the greatest game of all time.
Which is incorrect. It's Chrono Trigger. Yeah, it's pretty much one of those. If there was a Mount Rushmore of video games, Polygonal Link would probably be one of the heads on it, for sure.
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. What happens with the legacy of Ocarina of Time, though? Well, Nintendo developed an altered version of Ocarina of Time with the working title of Ura Zelda, or Another Zelda, for the N64 DD. And then, of course, that failed as well because the platform didn't pan out. But this would eventually be ported to Nintendo GameCube in 2002 with what we would now know as Ocarina of Time Master Quest. And it's a version of the game with remixed dungeons and puzzles. Master Quest would also get the remastered treatment as it was included inside Ocarina of Time 3D. But Nintendo used the foundations of this engine that was set by Ocarina of Time to make the next game in the Zelda series, The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, which would release on Nintendo 64 in 2000. Of course, the Zelda franchise continues today, as we currently anticipate the still untitled sequel to The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild.
I can't believe we still don't know what it's called, even.
I know. It's the sequel to The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. They know it carries that cachet. But then they say that if we told you the name, you'd be able to infer some things about the story, and we don't want that to happen too early. Are we going to be playing as a Ganondorf form? Is it going to be, the time reversal thing? We'll have to see. But yes, this game, this sequel to Breath of the Wild was recently delayed to an estimated release of spring 2023. It's going to be at least 6 years since the last one. Oh boy. You know what? If there's a team that can knock it out of the park, it is the Zelda team for sure. But yes, when we're talking about who are we talking about this week? Is it a composer? Is it a musician? We're talking about a conductor, and his name is Taizo Takemoto. Taizo Takemoto was born on February 19th, 1956 in Kobe, Hyogo Prefecture in Japan. He is blood type A, and he's the first conductor we've talked about on the show. It's a weird connection there where, again, when you talk about like earlier games, you're not really getting into like sound recording or sound engineering or musicians that they're not playing live instruments. So where do you go to? It's a stretch here, but we'll get to it here. Not too much information out there about Taizo Takemoto, but apparently at the Karajan competition that Japan held in 1977, he conducted the Berlin Philharmoniker and won second prize. And as a result of doing this, he was invited to study mainly in Berlin. So after returning to Japan, he has performed as a guest performer in major orchestras nationwide. And he says he is active in the front lines of opera, ballet, musicals, as well as classical concerts. It seems like his main focus these days, at least according to his website, is anime concerto, which is basically conducting live orchestras alongside projected animation. Makes me think a lot of video games live, but at least like when they're performing alongside, let's say, classic cartoons, and, the score is being performed live by these orchestras, like that kind of thing, I think.
I know there's a company currently doing like tours of concerts like that with anime music and other stuff as well, but I know anime music is one of the themes that they tend to do, and I wonder if it's anything like that.
It probably is, honestly, but it seems to be a thing that he's doing in Japan. You can check out his website at tomodachi-web.com/Takemoto, and you can follow him on Twitter at Takemoto_Taizo, Taizo. For his discography, for games that he's been a conductor of, Super Smash Bros. Melee.
Huh.
There's also Tales of Legendia, Nobunaga's Ambition, Tenka Sosei, and Shijo Onban, The Last Remnant, Super Mario Galaxy 2, Saga Scarlet Grace, The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess, Ocarina of Time 3D, and Skyward Sword. He is also the conductor on game music collections, like the Zelda 25th and 30th Anniversary albums, the Kirby 25th Anniversary album, and also the Fate Grand Order Orchestra. He also composed music that appeared in film and television, such as Final Fantasy Advent Children and one of the episodes of Star Wars Visions.
One of the only good things to come out of Final Fantasy Advent Children.
I guess so, yeah. When it comes to the historical development research, of course, the music is composed by the one and only Koji Kondo. And in addition to characters having musical themes, the areas of Hyrule are also associated with pieces of music. And so I guess this has been called a leitmotif in reverse. Instead of music announcing an entering character, it now introduces a stationary environment as the player approaches. Beyond providing a backdrop for the setting, music also plays an integral role in the gameplay because you get to play an ocarina, that little high-pitched instrument that you learn different melodies for it, and it has a variety of different effects. Actually, the button layout of the Nintendo 64 controller resembles the holes of the ocarinas in the game, and so players must learn to play several songs in order to complete the game. These songs are all played using the 5 notes available on an ocarina, although by bending pitches via the analog stick, players can play additional tones. I don't think I knew that.
I also did not know that. That is, that's too much for me. But, quick question. Did you have to also open the menu every time you needed to play literally any song that wasn't like the Sun song to remind yourself how they go? Because I could not, for the life of me, memorize a single one of them except for the Sun song.
I feel like in my first couple playthroughs, maybe, but after you start to play the game so much and these melodies have been just embedded in your mind, you kind of fumble around the notes to be like, oh yeah, this is this pitch and a da-da, da-da-da-da. And I'm like, okay, I mean, or obviously Zelda's Lullaby is like the key one, but Song of Time too, like that's in a da-da-da-da-da.
I know Song of Time mainly because of Majora's Mask, because if you don't know the Song of Time, Majora's Mask, you're gonna die.
Right.
But that's literally the only reason why. And I have to like refresh myself on what the Song of Time is every time I play Majora's Mask, which is the Zelda I've replayed the most. So that should tell you something about how my memory works.
And that's so interesting that like Majora's Mask is like, I think one where like, yeah, I played it maybe twice. And so it's like kind of vice versa for us there. That's really interesting. But yeah, I guess you could bend pitches with the analog stick. Koji Kondo said that creating distinct themes on what is admittedly a limited scale was a major challenge, but he also feels that the end result is very natural. And of course, the popularity of Ocarina of Time led to an increase in Ocarina sales. Well, that only goes to show and figure.
Yeah, that checks out 100%.
One of the classic stories with the music in this game is that the original music theme for the Fire Temple, it was altered before the release of the game, as it included a vocal chanting sample that was taken from a commercially available sound library, but the developers did not realize that it contained Islamic references. And this is normally not a problem, but Nintendo has a policy of not including really religious references in their products. It's nothing about Islam per se, but it's just Nintendo not wanting to touch religion with a 10-foot pole. So
I do think there's also some rules in Islam that are specifically like, you can't use our stuff in like entertainment.
Sure,
like
sure.
You just can't do it.
Sure, that would make sense. I just didn't want it to be like, oh, Islam bad. Like, not that at all, but like, they just didn't want to, get involved with that. So, didn't realize. And once they did, the theme was changed by simply removing the chanting samples. Also, some critics and fans were disappointed that the traditional Zelda overworld theme, bum, bum, ba-ba-ba-da-da-dum, ba-da-da-da-dum, not in this game.
One of the few games where it doesn't show up.
I know. Pretty surprising, but I feel like I've read in the past that is like, this was a fresh start for them going to a 3D world. They maybe feel like they should have a fresh musical start as well. And so how is Taizo Takemoto involved with this? Well, people may remember, I know I certainly have a copy of a CD-based Ocarina of Time 3D soundtrack that was available to Club Nintendo members at the time. If you kind of registered the game there, they'd, hey, we have this CD that we want to send out to you if you're interested. And said, sure, send it to me. And on that Ocarina of Time 3D soundtrack, it includes End Credits 2, which is a fully orchestrated medley of Ocarina of Time music that was specially recorded for the soundtrack. And it's arranged by Mahito Yokota. And it's conducted by Taizo Takemoto. So, the stretches we go to loop someone into, we finally made it work after more than 3 years. So let's talk about the music to Ocarina of Time. And we get into the 5 critical tracks that were just impossible to pick for the game. So, give us feedback on, did we do a good job? What did we miss? What would you have included? So we'll start with the 5 critical tracks, and we start with this first one. It has to be title theme. Not one of the slam dunk pieces, but I feel like it was on that next tier right there because so many people associate this song with the memories they have of playing Ocarina of Time. And that's because it plays on the title screen as that sunrise comes up and Link is galloping on Epona the horse. Yes, what a just simple, beautiful piece. Again, Nintendo 64, not the best MIDIs out there for their instruments, but you know what? Taking advantage of the ones that sound good, especially for the time, and just making the most of them. The piano, some strings, and that ocarina that comes in as the woodwind. So just a simple, calming, soothing melody that really doesn't convey the grandness of the adventure that you're about to have, but really just kind of soothes you until you press A, and then the classic fairy fountain piece from Link to the Past comes in.
One of the most iconic title screens in video games, and I think that this song is a major part of that. It is an odd choice for a game like Zelda, but Zelda kind of always has these sort of more low-key songs on their title screens, at least as far as I can remember, except for, Majora's Mask, where it's creepy, because that's Majora. That's, it has to be. But yeah, this is, I think, probably one of the most iconic and recognizable title themes in games in general. It's very, very memorable and good.
Absolutely. And I think it's really, once that ocarina comes in, it's that sound of the instrument that's so important to this game and really just delivers a nice melody line that comes in and just completes the whole sound. One of the must-have pieces, of course, is when you step out on that open world, that big overworld that connects all the different towns and all together. Number 2 on the Critical 5 for Ocarina of Time. This is, of course, Hyrule Field. Some versions of this song on their respective soundtrack kind of open with like the morning theme, the sunrising theme. But, for this one in particular, just hits you right with the bump, bump, bump. It hits you right with that energy right from the get-go. Getting the percussion going gives you that pace, that adventure. Like, this is really the adventure theme of the game. You're going to hear this one a lot for sure as you traverse across this overworld. Granted, when you get a horse, eventually it makes that traveling easier, but when you're on foot as a kid, the world feels so big at a time where open worlds were not really a concept, and I think it's just an important moment in gaming, and of course, rousing, stirring music that goes along with it. It had to be here. It was a for sure of all of these different songs.
It's also like one of those things where it's what separates the generations, where kids our age look at Hyrule Field and go, oh man, yeah, no, this was super impressive back in the day. And kids after our generation will look at Hyrule Field and go, I don't get it. It's like, there's nothing here. There's nothing in it.
These youngins these days, I swear.
They don't know how good they have it. But yeah, no, this song is probably one of the better overworld songs. I think The Great Sea is the only one that tops it for me. This is one of the only things I think that Ocarina of Time has over Majora's Mask, because sure, the complaints were that this game didn't have the original Zelda theme, but when it came back in Majora's Mask, it's boring.
Yeah, Termina wasn't the best.
It's Termina Field is not really the best of the overworld themes, so thanks, everybody. But this one is one of those that is just, and especially hearing orchestrations of this song.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Always so good. Yeah, this is a slam dunk, I think, 100%.
Absolutely. Just a foundational moment for sure. One that I've always been partial to, even though the original melody did not come from this game, ends up in the middle here. Number 3 on the Critical 5 for Ocarina of Time is Kakariko Village. Yes, the original melody originated with Link to the Past. Oh my gosh, we haven't even covered A Link to the Past. What's the angle we're going to do on that episode?
Who knows?
How are we going to do that? Oh my gosh. But yes, I feel like an important theme for this game, because it's one of the major towns that you visit. That's not like Goron City or Zora's Domain or things like that. Like it's an early village that you visit after your time in Hyrule Castle. And, could have done like the Hyrule Castle sneaking theme. That's a classic one. Again, so many classics, but I feel like since we have not really brought this theme to original Soundchat yet, it was an important one to include. And it's one that I always like too. It's really calming with kind of like an acoustic guitar like backing here. Again, we like our acoustic guitar here. An instrument that almost sounds like a harmonica in a way, like a really well-controlled harmonica. And then the flute comes in to kind of supplement it. But just a really nice calming piece for a town that is bustling with some action there. You get some construction workers there, but an important early moment in the game. And then it's a good contrast point from when 7 years in the future, things are not so good.
This is one of my favorite recurring melodies in Zelda in general.
Yes.
Especially hearing some of the new places other games take it, where it's like you can hear bits and pieces of it, but it's not exactly the same song, like Windfall Island and Wind Waker, and that kind of thing. But overall, this is just one of the nicest pieces in the series. And no, I have no idea how we will ever be able to find an angle for Link to the Past. Older games are hard.
No kidding. Yeah, when there's less people involved in the music creation and encoding the sound. This was tough enough, but I'm glad we made it work. The other slam dunk must-have piece on the Critical 5. Have you guessed it yet? You've probably guessed it yet. Number 4 here on the Critical 5. This is Gerudo Valley. Of course, Gerudo Valley is here. It's only the best song in the game. At least one that I always love listening to, and all of the different renditions on this theme. This is a popular one for people to cover, in case you do not know. A lot of people love putting their own take on Gerudo Valley from Ocarina of Time here. Not the most fun moment in the game that it plays on when you're captured by the Gerudo thieves and you have to navigate their complex when they're trying to spy and look out for you, and you kind of have to go through a maze to find the 4 carpenters that are locked up.
In fact, my personal least favorite part of the game.
Yeah, honestly, yeah, it's a tough one to kind of go through, and you gotta check each box. Like, did I go through this one? How about this one? Oh, I got caught. I gotta try it again. Oh, you got to take on the tough Gerudo fight and don't get hit. Like, it's crazy. But at least you get this theme to come back to as long as it's playing during the daytime in the game. What a piece with the acoustic guitar. You get the trumpet coming in and this little almost like a little maraca sort of vibe going on in the background. Definitely a big standout piece for this game. Not the most fun gameplay moment, but wow, what a musical standout.
It's the best song in Zelda, by far. I might like other games better than Ocarina, but this song is the best song in Zelda, and every time they have remixed it for Smash has been fantastic, especially the Wii U 3DS remix of Gerudo Valley. Oh my god, it's so good.
100%, yeah.
And yeah, just generally, this song lends itself really well to covers and remixes and all that. But in general, I also really like the percussion in this song a lot.
For sure.
And yeah, no, this is like one of the most perfect game songs ever. Shame Gerudo Village sucks.
But yeah, the musicality here, that's just, baked into the sound card for Nintendo 64. It's an all-timer. It's so good, all these melodies going. Wrapping things up was a little tough, but I feel like it's important to include the final boss, or at least part of the final boss. Number 5 on the Critical 5 tracks for Ocarina of Time is Ganondorf Battle. lot of great boss themes in this game. Is this one the most memorable musically? No. But I feel like it comes at an important moment with the final boss encounter. And as much as I love the Ganon reveal and the the big fight against Pig Ganon, it's a great moment. It's, you know, such high stakes for the final showdown. Once it gets into the music, it's not that interesting musically, I think. So at least I think this one, you know, granted, your Ganondorf's floating around. You got to play tennis with him back and forth as, you know, blocks are falling away. It's a pretty tricky fight, you know, especially if you're new to the game. I mean, once you play it, you know, so many times, it's okay. We're going to play tennis with Ganondorf again. Get used to the timing because it's different between the different Zelda games, and that's tricky if you're playing Zelda after Zelda. But I feel like this one is better musically and goes to some more interesting places, and that's why Ganondorf Battle is here.
I think the Ganon fight music is more meant to build, like, tone than it is to be a song, which is fine. That works perfectly. It works perfectly well for the fight that it's in, but this one having more of a melody does certainly put it ahead. Is this no, Link to the Past would have been the one that invented the tennis match boss fights, but this is the one that, like, the 3D Zeldas do the tennis match boss fights the best, and this is the beginning of that, but also it's the roughest one.
Yes. Oh my gosh, yes it is.
And that's what I always think of.
100%, that's definitely the case. Yeah. It's a little tricky, and you got to get the camera just right to time it just right, and especially when you get a little delay on your sword swing. Oh yeah, it's tricky, this one, but the music is good, that's for sure. Fortunately, the cutting room floor gives us both an opportunity to flesh out some songs that just missed the cut, but were worth mentioning. Joe, you have a couple. Hit me with them.
One of my favorite songs in Ocarina of Time is Windmill Hut. Obviously, this is the Song of Storms, but I don't know, it's just really catchy, and it's fun to whistle, too, and I'm pretty sure the first time I had ever heard it was in Brawl. That's wild to think about. But, yeah, it plays in a windmill hut where there's a dude, for some reason, who has decided, I'm gonna play music out of this hut, and then Link ruins his life by making it rain inside of the... It's a really, really weird sequence of events, but this song is just one of the more fun pieces in the game, especially in terms of, like, not really side content, because you have to do it, but you get what I mean. It's not really, like, a main song.
And it's a fun little ocarina melody that you have to kind of start up, or at least you kind of get the foundation of the da-da-da, da-da-da.
Yeah.
Like that's what you kind of play on your ocarina to churn up the Song of Storms. It's interesting when I think about this song to think of like how at least the Ocarina of Time arrangement of this song still carries over today, and how like current generations think of it through different social media, whether it's Twitter or TikTok even. I've seen this song on TikTok. So just weird to, see the da-da-da, 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 like the catchy, powerful melody just carry over across the years. And I think that's powerful, powerful stuff. I'm glad you included it here.
And my second one is kind of a weird one, but I figured we should get at least one of the dungeon songs in here. And honestly, the dungeon music in this game is not the best. Like, it does a very good job it's like the Ganon fight, like we were talking about. It does a very good job at building a tone for that dungeon, but for the most part, like, I wouldn't say it's super memorable, but something about Forest Temple always catches my interest. it's just this weird, ghostly ambiance for a lot of it. But for some reason, I always think about the little, like, woodwinds part that just sort of fades in and out every once in a while. It gives this dungeon like a very supernatural feeling to it, which, considering Poes are a big part of that dungeon, that makes a lot of sense. And I don't know, the real most memorable dungeon theme in Ocarina of Time is the version of the Fire Temple with the chanting, but that doesn't exist. So Forest Temple, I think, is a very close second for me.
When it comes to the temples, of course, everyone talks about the Water Temple. And so much so that, the Ocarina of Time 3D made certain improvements to help that experience. It's definitely one where I always look back on that as like, okay, maybe if you were 10 and you were new to games, like I can see how that'd be difficult, but it's not so tough when you've been playing games or if you play the game multiple times. So like that's the most famous temple dungeon in this game. If I think of the best ones, I think it's tied for me between Forest Temple and Spirit Temple. And Forest Temple certainly has, I would agree, the best music to go with it because of these different sort of instruments that come into play. This, yeah, the da-dun, 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 da-dun. Like it definitely has the little echoey da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. It's super great with the atmosphere. And you're right, Nintendo 64 atmospheric music, there's only so much you can do with it, but I feel like this one in particular with the Forest Temple makes the most of those limitations.
100%.
For me, it was interesting to pick a couple, so I chose these. The first one is Kokiri Forest. It's a simple little piece, but it has some fun, positive energy, and get the strings coming in there to da 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 da. And this is important because the Kokiri Forest is the first area that you start in. Link is woken up by Navi. He steps out of his house, and you have your first area that you're able to control Link freely in. At least as far as exploring the world and talking to people and learning how to do that. And how do you get your sword and your shield? It's a good starting tutorial environment. And so it's really an important theme that sets you off on the foundations of how do you play a 3D action venture game like one that we're starting to lay the foundations with here. So just a really important theme. Not only is it great and catchy, my goodness, like the Lost Woods would be up there as far as like memorable themes and all that, but I feel it's the combination of important starting area with great catchy music.
When I think of this song, and also the house theme in Ocarina, I think of, I don't remember where this was from, but there was some local news station at one point was doing a story on something. I think it was like housing or something. Might not have even been housing. I don't remember. But people were like looking at it and listening and going, that's Kokiri Forest in the background of this news story. What? And the house theme was also in there as well. That's all I can think of when I hear this song. But it's very catchy, and I dig it a lot.
I think it's another one that's, stood the test of time and made it to younger people through social media. It's just interesting to hear that there. And then there's another point here on the cutting room floor where we were kind of going back and forth with which theme to include, and they were from the same area of the game. But I feel like if we had to pick one, it's going to be Horse Race.
It'd be a crime for this to not be here.
Exactly. And, for Lon Lon Ranch to be the other one in consideration, that's also a great theme. But I think it's more fun just to hear the energy of this one, and Koji Kondo kind of dabbling in like banjo western energy. It's just a fun, catchy theme. And granted, can be a difficult part of the game if the AI is not on your side and you're not taking the right lines in your horse race to try to win Epona. But man, what a piece. What a fun song.
I love the fiddle. And
yes,
this song is some good MIDI fiddle, even though it's, N64 MIDI fiddle, so it doesn't sound great. But also, MIDI fiddle's really fun to say, huh?
Sure
find
is,
more
yeah.
reasons to say those two words together. I adore this song. It's one of my favorite songs in the entire game. And I really like the Lon Non Ranch music, the sort of Epona song that plays throughout the whole thing. But like, this version is the best version of Epona song there will ever be. It's great. I love it. I love it so much.
What will I never forget about this game? Well, apparently, aside from weird associations for celebrities dying when I play it, I think it's just the beat for beat. Like, it's such a straightforward adventure to the point where like so many people have used it as reference to either improve on it or borrow aspects from it. But is everything an answer? If there's one game that it's like, I'll never forget everything about a game, I think it is Ocarina of Time. It's one of those all-timers and powerful classics for a reason.
For me, earlier, you unearthed a memory for some reason. One of my first times seeing gameplay of Ocarina of Time was actually watching you stream it on Stickam.
Oh my gosh. Probably the Wii version, if I had to guess.
Maybe. I believe I came into you fighting Morpho.
Okay.
I think. That's all I remember. I don't even know if I stuck around in that stream very long, but yeah, a Stickam stream.
Woo, boy world.
Ancient history. For kids that don't know, Stickam used to be what we used to stream video games because Twitch didn't exist and Justin TV was still young.
It was 2008.
Yep. It was, that time that was 4,000 years ago. Yeah. So for some reason, that's something I'll never forget. And also, I'll never forget that this game gave me the best Zelda game with its assets. And, I'll leave it at that.
There's something to be said there for sure. All right. Well, I don't think I would have ever paired Ocarina of Time with Sumire, but, they're both young protagonists that have ball-like companions, so there is that. So that will do it for us this week on Original Soundchat. You can find me on Twitter at PeteSpeakEasy. Joe is over at StringPixel. The video version of the show is on the Rhymes with Asia YouTube channel, but it's that MP3 podcast version that you want. That's hosted by Anonymous Dinosaur at anondino.squarespace.com. It's where Joe's other podcast, Smasherpieces, is hosted. And you can find Smasherpieces and Original Soundchat wherever you get your podcasts. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, even on Spotify, where we have a feed of podcast episodes, but we also have a big playlist. And when we talk about a video game track on this show, and it's on Spotify, it gets added to this monster playlist. Joe, what's being added this week?
Well, Zelda obviously is not on Spotify because, Nintendo. They don't release their music anywhere, ever. But for a long time, I figured Sumire wasn't because I couldn't find it. I would search TOW, couldn't even find the artist. I would search Sumire, nothing. Come to find out that if I dug really hard using Google, I accidentally found it on Spotify. So, I don't know how long it's been there, but that will shockingly be added to the playlist.
That's amazing. And when you're done listening, you can find the show on social media at Soundchat OST. And leave some feedback for us. How are we doing with these episodes? Did we pick an okay critical 5 for Ocarina of Time? And also give us some suggestions for games to cover in the future, because that's one of our continued goals for 2022. All right, Joe, who are we talking about next week?
Well, next week, I think you know what I'm going to be thinking about because I'll be talking about Caro Caro Bonito.
I do have an inkling there. I will be talking about Taro Bando. And that's an interesting game to get to as well. It's going to be a fun episode. I'm looking forward to it. To play us out, it's got to be a cover of Gerudo Valley, right?
That's the one.
You could probably do an Ocarina of Time medley, I'm sure. But if we're looking at Gerudo Valley covers, I feel like we have to bring back the Mariachi Entertainment System group. I feel like we mentioned them and brought them up when we talked about Grim Fandango, which, that only fits. But Mariachi Entertainment System did a cover of Gerudo Valley, and it's fantastic. So please enjoy that. Thank you so much for listening this week on Original Soundchat. We'll see you next time. Take care.